The fossil record would not be as useful to us without a time scale to tell us what happened when. Researchers use several techniques to date rocks and fossils. Because sedimentary rock is formed as layers of sediment, and those layers are laid on top of existing sediments, lower layers of sedimentary rock and the fossils they contain are generally older than upper layers. Relative dating places rock layers and their fossils in a temporal sequence. That means it puts them in order by time. The oldest fossils are on the bottom, the newest or youngest fossils are on the top. Relative dating allows paleontologists to determine whether a fossil is older or younger than other fossils. But relative dating doesn't tell us how old something is or how young it is. It just tells us whether it's older or younger than something else that was found in the ground. To help establish the relative ages of rock layers and their fossils, scientists use things called index fossils. Index fossils are distinctive fossils used to establish and compare the relative ages of rock layers and the fossils they contain. A useful index fossil must be easily recognized and will occur only in a few rock layers. That means that it only lived for a short time in Earth's history. But these layers will be found in many places, meaning the organism is widely distributed. So something that lived in a large area, that inhabited a large area of the world for a short period of time and is very easily recognized, makes a good index fossil. Trilobites are a large group of very distinctive marine organisms. Trilobites are often used as index fossils. There are more than 15,000 different recognized species of trilobite. Together, they can be used to establish the relative dates of rock layers spanning nearly 300 million years. Because over those 300 million years, trilobites were widespread, but during different parts of that 300 million year period, different species existed. So if you find a certain species in a layer of rock, it gives you a clue to how old that rock is. Let's look at the diagram. Which index fossil is found in all three locations? Well, if you look, you can find fossil D at location 1, location 2, and location 3. Using the index fossils shown, determine which layers are missing from each location. Well, in location 1, the layer with index fossil E is missing. Location 2 is missing the layers with index fossils B, E, and F. And location 3 is missing the layers with index fossils A and C. Layers might be missing because they were never formed, or they may have been eroded sometime in the past. Relative dating is important, but it provides no information about a fossil's absolute age in years. It just gives us its relative age, doesn't tell us how many years ago it lived or died. It just tells us whether it died sooner or later than some other organism that was also found in layers of rock. One way to date rocks and fossils and come up with a precise estimate of the date is called radiometric dating. Radiometric dating relies on radioactive isotopes, which decay or break down into stable isotopes at a steady rate. A half-life is the time required for half of the radioactive atoms in a sample to decay. Radioactive dating uses the proportion of radioactive to stable isotopes to calculate the age of a sample. What is the half-life of potassium-40? Well, if we look at the graph, we can see that approximately half of the potassium-40 decays into some other form over a period of 1.26 billion years. So how much potassium-40 should be left in 2.56 billion years? That's twice the half-life. Well, half of it decays in the first half-life, 1.26 billion years, and then half of what's left decays over the next half-life, another 1.26 billion years. That's a total of 2.56 billion years. So after 2.56 billion years, we should have 1/4 of the original amount of potassium-40 left. If a fossil has 1/8 the amount of potassium-40, approximately how old is it? Well, it's 3 half-lives old, or 3.78 billion years. Different radioactive isotopes decay at different rates, so they have different half-lives. Elements with short half-lives are used to date recent fossils. Elements with long half-lives are used to date older fossils. An isotope known as carbon-14 is useful for directly dating fairly recent fossils. Carbon-14 is produced at a steady rate in the upper atmosphere, so air generally contains a tiny amount of it in addition to the much more common stable, non-radioactive form of carbon, carbon-12. Plants take carbon-14 in when they absorb carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, and animals acquire it when they eat plants or other animals. So throughout an organism's lifetime, it should have a consistent percentage of carbon-14. A certain percentage of the carbon in its body should be carbon-14, and that's a known amount. Once that organism dies, it no longer takes in this isotope, so its age can be determined by the amount of carbon-14 remaining in tissues such as bone, hair, or wood. Carbon-14 has a half-life of roughly 5,730 years, so it can only be used to date organisms that lived during the last 60,000 years, because after so many half-lives have passed, it becomes hard to detect and measure the amount of carbon-14 accurately. Older fossils can be dated indirectly by dating the rock layers in which they are found. Isotopes with much longer half-lives are used for this purpose, including potassium-40 with a half-life of 1.26 billion years, uranium-238 with a half-life of 4.5 billion years, and rubidium-87, which has a half-life of 48.8 billion years. Remember, the planet is only about 4.5 billion years old. Geologists use these and other isotope methods to make increasingly accurate estimates of the ages of geological formations. These studies provide direct physical evidence for the ages of index fossils that identify periods of Earth's history. These data, in turn, provide information used to document the sequential nature of groups in the fossil record and the rates at which groups appear, evolve, and become extinct. Why can't carbon-14 be used to estimate the age of very old fossils? Carbon-14 has a relatively short half-life of 5,730 years. After about 60,000 years, so little carbon-14 remains in fossils that it cannot be used to accurately assess the age of the fossils. While radiometric dating provides an absolute age, it is far more complicated than simply running a test on a fossil. Unless the fossil sample is fairly young and can be carbon-14 dated, it cannot often be dated directly. Geologists must radiometrically date the rock in which the fossil sits. But that too is complicated because most fossils occur in sedimentary rock. And dating sedimentary rock gives the age of the rock that served as the source for the sediment. It doesn't give the age of the sedimentary rock itself, because remember, sedimentary rock forms from rock that was broken down and then redeposited by deposition. So if we can find the age of that original rock, but not the sediment, the age that the layer of sediment was formed. The only rock that can be dated reliably is igneous rock. Igneous rock is rock that is formed from lava that comes out of volcanoes and cools on the Earth's surface. In most situations, geologists use a mix of absolute dating of igneous rock and relative dating of layers to estimate fossil ages. Igneous rock can also be formed without coming out of volcanoes. It can cool under the Earth's surface, so there are actually different kinds of igneous rock. Igneous rock that formed on the surface and igneous rock that formed under the surface, but igneous rock in general is formed from lava that cooled. If a fossil sits in sedimentary rock that is directly below a layer of 15 million year old igneous rock, what can we infer about the fossil's age? Well, if the layer above it is 15 million years old, we can infer that the fossil is older than 15 million years. By studying rock layers and index fossils, early paleontologists placed Earth's rocks and fossils in order according to their relative ages. As they worked, they noticed major changes in the fossil record at boundaries between certain rock layers. Geologists used these boundaries to determine where one division of geologic time ended and the next began. Years later, radiometric dating techniques were used to assign specific ages to the various rock layers. This timescale is constantly being tested, verified, and adjusted. Think of it like the timescale we use. We can think of time as being in years, months, or days, or even smaller or larger periods. Well, the geologic timescale is also broken down into different units. The largest unit is the eon. Eons are the longest time scale. Eons are divided into eras. Eras are subdivided into periods, which range in length from nearly 100 million years to just under 2 million years. The Paleozoic era, for example, is divided into 6 periods, including the Permian period. The Paleozoic era is on the bottom of this slide and continues on the next slide. Which era are we currently in? You can see that we are currently in the Cenozoic era. Specifically, we're in the Quaternary period of the Cenozoic era. What are the periods of the Mesozoic era, from oldest to most recent? Well, the Mesozoic era started with Triassic, then the Jurassic period, and then the Cretaceous period. And when did the Cretaceous period end? It ended about 65.5 million years ago when the Cenozoic era began. Geologists now recognize 4 eons. The Hadean eon, during which the first rocks formed, spans the time from Earth's formation to about 4 billion years ago. The Archean or Archean eon, during which life first appeared, followed the Hadean. The Proterozoic eon began 2.5 billion years ago and lasted until 542 million years ago. The Phanerozoic eon began at the end of the Proterozoic and continues to the present. What is the name of the oldest time interval on the scale? That's Precambrian time. Divisions of the geologic time scale were named in different ways. The Cambrian period, for example, was named after Cambria, an old name for the country of Wales, where rocks from that time were first identified. The Carboniferous, meaning carbon-bearing period, is named for large coal deposits that formed during that time. Geologists started to name divisions of the time scale before any rocks older than the Cambrian period had been identified. For this reason, All of geologic time before the Cambrian was simply called Precambrian time. Precambrian time, however, actually covers about 90% of Earth's history in 3 eons. Our lives are so short compared to the life of the Earth that it can be hard to think in terms of billions or even millions of years. To help visualize the enormous span of time since Earth formed, think about the history of Earth in a 24-hour period. Here are some landmark events in Earth's history, beginning with the formation of Earth and ending with modern humans. This animation plays at 1 event per second. How does this clock differ from most clocks in everyday use? Well, a regular clock only shows 12 hours. This clock shows 24 hours. Regular clocks also do not include the geologic timescale. They would be incredibly slow if they did. How long is Precambrian time? Well, if you look at the Earth as a 24-hour, if the Earth's life so far in a 24-hour period, 21 hours of that is Precambrian time. That's most of the Earth's history. And how long have modern humans been on the Earth in this 24-hour clock? Well, just a little over a minute of the 24 hours has included modern humans. And if you look at different events of life, you can see the first living cells evolved fairly early on, and then photosynthetic organisms started generating oxygen so they started taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. So that's over an enormous time period that our atmosphere became oxygen rich. And then eukaryotic cells, so between 8 a.m. between 5:30 a.m. and 12:48 p.m. all morning, essentially, you had only prokaryotic organisms, and then right around lunchtime, that's where eukaryotic cells finally evolve. So it takes a very, 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 very long time for these big steps in evolution to take place. We didn't have multicellular animals until 5:36 p.m., chordates 9:10 p.m. Then we see land plants, tetrapods, dinosaurs. I mean, even the dinosaurs, which we think of as ancient, didn't even evolve until 10:45 p.m. And then they were around for a while. Then mammals, flowering plants, the dinosaurs went extinct at 11:39 p.m. And then here we come at the last minute, modern humans to take over the world.